Hey, it's Matt, your average gamer, and we got a decently long one here. We're going to be going into Journey 11, and this is going to be a bow-focused build, but mainly, too, we're going to be focusing on all of the Bandit's starting equipment, how it does in the later journeys at level 150. Let's get into the details. Well, I will say this, if you're getting a little bit bored and there's something you need to do to change up Elden Ring and you want a challenge, this is definitely going to be the video for you. We all know in advance of everything that's going to be in this video that bows aren't the strongest thing in Elden Ring, but they can be a lot of fun, they can be really versatile, and they can be very, very good in certain situations. They absolutely have their niche use. Obviously, we know in PvP as well. You're going to see in this video me use the short bow. I'm using all of the Bandit starting equipment as I mentioned at level 150. We're going to take on several different early game bosses, but new game plus 7 bosses. So if you're looking for the best bow with Barrage, it's probably going to be the black bow. So if you grab the black bow, you're going to get a little bit more damage out of it, and you can follow the same stats and the same general guide of this video if you're using the black bow or you're looking for a build for the black bow. So, for our choice of arrows, we're going to talk about the choice of arrows first. We are maining blood bone arrows. We are maining the arrows essentially that can cause bleed buildup, and we're using that because it's going to give us the advantage of being able to proc bleed while also getting a decent amount of damage out of each individual arrow as well. Second to that, our other option is going to be either poison or rot arrows. That gives us the versatility of applying status effects relatively quickly with being able to use Barrage, the Ash of War that we have on the short bow, and it's very, very helpful in addition to using the bleed arrows. So we got our setup going on, and we're going to talk about the Great Knife and the things that you can do with that. We're also going to go over the Buckler Shield as well, pretty much all of the Bandit's starting equipment around level 150 and how it holds up. Using the knife a little bit with Bloodflame Blade, we have that on quality because we went for dexterity and strength because most bows in the game are quality. You're not going to get a ton of additional damage out of them, but if you're going for a quality setup, it will benefit the majority of bows in Elden Ring. As far as the Tree Sentinel himself, he's got decent amount of resistances. He does have some strong attacks at his disposal, but as long as we keep our distance, we can do the main thing that bows have at their advantage, and that is being able to attack from a substantial distance. And using something like the Arrow's Reach Talisman will benefit us even further as we're able to hit relatively hard from a pretty safe distance. It actually caused me to have to focus up, and I focus a lot now when I'm playing Elden Ring, and I am better at it than I used to be. I'm far from perfect, as you guys already know. With most of my videos, I'm mostly average at the game and whatnot, and I generally play for fun. But as far as Elden Ring itself goes, using a bow is definitely a challenge, and using a bow not only is a challenge, it's going to get you back into being able to dodge, to finding the right windows, to not very often getting greedy, and basically waiting for the right openings to punish with something like Barrage. That payoff is there since we're getting the bleed build up with the bloodbone arrows, and we're able to use that to basically get some procs in addition to decent damage, and then we're using stuff like the poison arrows, and later you're going to see me use rot arrows to get the ticks as well in between. That way we can get a lot of damage out of the status effects and procs in between the damage from the arrows themselves. One thing I can say as you go in and fight different bosses with a bow, the one thing that I can say that is a really cool aspect of being able to fight them with a bow, and I think bows are cool in general, it's something that I've always liked in video games, is the fact that we're able to essentially jump back, get as many attacks in, being able to dodge the attacks, but getting large openings from making a distance, being so far away, and then having that ability to still attack from a reasonable distance. And by the time the boss comes back to you, you have plenty of time to dodge or figure out your next move. So what I'm trying to say basically is that you have the ability to punish bosses from a distance while dodging, creating a distance, and then having so much time to read the next animation or attacks. Now granted, all boss areas aren't exactly always huge. You're going to see with Margit, definitely suffers a little bit in how small the arena is, but for larger arenas, you have so much room that you can keep your distance, get hit less generally speaking, and have a lot of windows to attack and use your bow. Now, bows aren't the strongest thing in Elden Ring. I think I already mentioned that. They're a little bit lacking in terms of power, but the thing here is you get the advantage of the distance, as I mentioned, but you also get the advantage of doing something that's a little bit of a challenge, and doing this build was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun because it made me think about every move that I was going to do, made me think about what arrows I was going to use, and each boss was a challenge to face again. The first time you take down a boss with a bow, you're going to have a lot of fun and you're going to say that's really rewarding. You're going to find yourself thinking it's very rewarding to be able to beat a boss with a bow because it's challenging to do so. So as we go on with Margit here, we're going to go with the whole applying status effects. Since most of the bosses in the game, not all, but most of them can have status effects, at least some of them applied, we're going to take the advantage of using rot arrows here in combination with blood arrows for a significant portion of Margit's damage. We did have the shackle at our disposal too to give us a little bit of help there because we want to be able to use Barrage to get that rot applied as quickly as possible so that can start chewing at his HP and then we can build up those bleed procs with the blood arrows on the short bow. The whole point of this build, after all, the entire point of being able to do a bow build is to get the most out of a weapon that we've mentioned many times, I think already at this point, that is a little bit lacking in Elden Ring, and try to make the best out of bows because they're really cool to use. And again, if you're looking for a challenge, if you're looking just to make things more interesting, I recommend trying to run a bow for a while, beat a couple bosses with it. It's really challenging. So you're going to see with Margit here, it's a little bit of a challenging to use the bow on him because the arena is small and Margit and Morgott, both variations are very anti-ranged. If you start using ranged attacks, they can punish you very, very easily by throwing the swords, by jumping up with the hammer, basically by being able to close the distance very quickly and stop your animations. Do be aware of that when you're fighting them, that's something that you definitely want to consider when you're using a bow. They are on the more challenging side when you're trying to use ranged attacks on them because they have a tendency to constantly close that distance, close that gap between you and them, making it a little challenging to use stuff like Barrage. As you're going to see here, again, he does the jump down, the slam down, and everything, but soon we're going to be able to get a bunch of damage on him to close out this fight and finish off Morgott as well, take on a couple different things. We're going to go over mobs and such too, what you can do with the Great Knife and what you can do with the Buckler Shield also. Last boss we're going to fight upcoming here is going to be Godrick, which we're going to show a little bit of our distance attacks and whatnot on him. We're going to try to apply rot as well, and then we're going to go over mobs and such before we go over equipment, stats, build, and everything you guys need to know. So about a month after the game came out, I beat the game with a bow. I did use summons for the final couple of bosses simply for the fact that I was still new at Elden Ring at the time. It was only a couple runs into me playing Elden Ring, and I ended up trying to beat the game with a bow. The last couple bosses were hard, so I used some summons at the time. I do remember this with Godrick, though, and I remember seeing it now, obviously. Kind of brought back memories, but you can get the same attack spammed repeatedly if you end up using a bow, simply for the fact that it's something the AI reads. And he is not able to be hit with any arrows when he does the windup, but when he comes down, you can punish him with Barrage, and he'll jump back up into the windup again. As you can see, he has the rot chipping down his HP, and then after the rot, we're going to continue to build up those blood arrows to look for the procs and try to bait him into doing the same attacks over and over again and keep our distance. You can also fire a bow, by the way, a lot quicker the regular way by jumping. So if you jump and fire, that's something you can benefit from. But for the main purpose of this video, I am focusing mostly on Barrage. Simply for the fact that that's the Ash of War that we're choosing to use here. And as we go into the second phase, we're going to take on second phase Godrick, which obviously has the fire portion of him, and try to build up status effects again on him as quickly as possible and take him down with the procs. So for the second phase of Godrick, if you're using a bow, just run up right underneath him and then hit him as many times as you possibly can. Shortly after that, back off, keep your distance, and then you're going to be able to punish like we talked about throughout this video over and over again. HP is going to gradually dwindle down as we look for those blood procs. By the way, if you want a bow that specifically scales with Arcane, the only one that's going to up your bleed build up is the Serpent Bow, which scales with Arcane, but it is locked into Mighty Shot so you don't get Barrage. So he's going to use a lot of fire attacks apparently, maybe because I'm far away, I'm not sure. But either way, we're going to be able to punish that very, very easily. You can roll right through the fire and then come back by using jump attacks, regular attacks, or attacking with Barrage. Even with all that HP, even with these being a little bit harder bosses to fight by the fact that they're new game +7, they're still the early game bosses, so they're not overly challenging. We're able to get in a ton of damage and finish off Godrick's second phase rather quickly. By the way, if I haven't really sold you on the whole bow thing yet, the main thing I could say about it is, are they super overpowered? No, they're not overpowered. They're incredibly underpowered, but it is a challenge to use them, and it makes each individual fight challenging and unique. And if it's something you haven't used yet, you definitely should try out a bow. They are really fun to use. All right, let's get into mobs here. We're going to go over the Bandit Great Knife, the Great Knife that we got at the beginning of the game, and then the Buckler Shield as well. And we're going to be able to parry with that because we put Golden Parry on it, make our lives a little bit easier, even though I do miss some of these. And we're going to punish with the Great Knife. And we're going to go over the buffing system later, but the main thing here is since we want a generic damage boost, and Flame Grant Me Strength will work because bows are mainly physical damage anyway, but if you want to go with generic damage, you can go for Golden Vow and Howl Shabriri and increase your overall damage by 40%. As for the parries, you're going to notice that I do miss some of them. By the way, we're using the Great Knife in quality to match our bow scaling, and then we're throwing Bloodflame Blade on it for additional bleed. By the way, parrying is something that obviously is really fun too. If you want to mix that with your bow build to even have more of a challenge, you can kind of combine this build and make it something where it's a challenging build by using everything the Bandit class starts with at a later level. It is kind of interesting to do that, not going to lie. And as far as mobs go here, it's just something where you're going to be able to damage them significantly by parrying, obviously, but you can use the Great Knife to shred through them too. It's not a bad knife after all. There obviously is better, but since I wanted to go with the whole Bandit theme at a later level, I ended up obviously being locked into the short bow and the Great Knife. It just seemed like a fun theme build to me that could also be a little bit of a challenge to do a run and do some bosses and some enemies with this build, and in the end it ended up being a lot of fun. This was one where I really enjoyed, but I like bows in general. I just wish they were a little bit better than they were, and hopefully in DLC we get a really solid bow with some better scaling. Before we finish up mobs here, by the way, if you're not on the Discord, definitely be sure to join that. And if you're not subbed, definitely be sure to sub to this channel. We're going to be doing non-stop Elden Ring content. Let's get into buffs. For buffs, first things first, drink your tear. And then the next thing that you're going to do here is you're going to use Golden Vow. And then we're using Howl Shabriri to boost us by another 25% for 40 seconds. Then you're going to drink your FP after. And then we're going to be able to jump and use our bow or use Barrage, whatever you choose to use at that point to get a significant amount of damage out of it. Let's get new equipment. For equipment, we have the Great Bow, preferably plus 25 with Barrage. That's what comes on it anyway. We have the Great Knife in quality. We're using Bloodflame Blade with that. We have the Buckler Shield, any seal, any set of armor. And then we have Arrows Reach, Arrows Sting, Talisman, Dragoncrest Great Shield Talisman, Ritual Swords Talisman. We have the Faith tier and the Defense tier as well. They combine well for this build. Let's get into stats. For stats here, we went for a quality setup. We're mainly investing in strength and dexterity as a mixture to kind of benefit the bow as much as we possibly can, and then everything else is secondary. Make sure you got a good enough amount of vigor and endurance as well on this build. Mine is a +2 if you're using Barrage often. Almost every bow in the game, or the majority of bows, is going to give you a quality setup, so you're going to want to invest in both those stats kind of equally, and I hope that was an awesome bow build for you guys. That was a lot of fun to do. It's a really fun setup in general, seeing the Bandit late game. Took on early game bosses, but it was in new game +7 and at level 150, so that was pretty exciting to see, and honestly exciting to do. Being able to jump back in and use a bow again in Elden Ring was a lot of fun. By the way, this week's challenge in Discord, if I didn't mention it, definitely be involved in that. If you want to give that a shot, it's to be able to beat any boss without being hit. Next week's challenge is going to be related to this video. Definitely be sure to join the Discord, and if you're not subbed and you love overpowered PvE builds, be sure to check out all the awesome builds that are on my channel. Thanks for watching, and as always, I will catch you guys there.